Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, I'm Stefan, and you're listening to Attributed, a podcast library by Dreamdata.
The purpose of it is to store and share all the knowledge that we have gathered across Dreamdata employees through our LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, and webinars.
The typical topics you'll find here can be stuff like marketing,
Sales,
B2B ads,
operations,
social selling maybe. Hello and welcome everybody to another Attributed session brought to you by Dreamdata. As usual, I'm Stefan, and today I've brought a Danish guest, not that typical for us, Michael. Michael, I've been following for more than 10 years now, I would say. We were briefly together in the same geeky online group 10 years ago or something like that, where you kind of had a reputation for being one of the best conversion rate optimization in Denmark. And then that wasn't big enough for you, so you headed over to North America and onbound, and since then you've been basically a keynote speaker all over the world.
Yes.
I thought it would be interesting to bring you in today to talk, because we talk about all sorts of B2B marketing disciplines. And I think one of the disciplines that are not super talked about is something that is super big if you're in e-commerce and stuff like that, which is conversion rate optimization. But before we jump into all these things, Michael, for those who haven't been following you for 10 years, how do you present yourself nowadays?
I've been working with, you can call it so many different things nowadays, experimentation, growth, marketing, CRO, growth hacking, whatever. I don't really care. I've been working within this area since 2008, so almost 16 years now. And I've worked with so many different things, everything from gambling to charity and everything in between. And I've been in-house, I've been with agencies, I've spent a long time as a solo consultant. So I've seen many different aspects of this industry. And I have kind of a unique profile in the sense that I've been in many different positions, for example, in-house and with agencies and so on. And then overall, my approach is very much research driven and experimentation driven. And if we kind of want to try to define what conversion rate optimization is, or one of the other terms I talked about before, to me at least, it's a process for making better business decisions through research, experimentation, and validation, really. That's the essence for me. And I think there can be a lot of misunderstandings, for example, that it's synonymous with A/B testing, and all you do is just run a bunch of A/B tests, which is a version that some people apply, but I think that's a very, very, very limited version of it.
And that's probably where I could fall in sometimes. So let's definitely expand that scope today. But like all those years ago, what actually, just to start out soft, what brought you into this world of constant testing of everything?
Well, yeah, I've been around in the industry for a while. So, not that it's super well established now, but at least today there's quite a bit of focus on it. There's an industry around it. There are agencies who specialize in it, and there's all kinds of different blogs and books and courses you can take. None of that existed when I started. So it was kind of, kind of cowboy learning by doing. And I worked for an agency back in the zeros, where I was focusing on copy and on search engine optimization. And after a while, I kind of realized that a lot of clients were paying us to drive a lot of traffic, but that traffic wasn't necessarily turning into, money or leads or whatever they were looking for. And that to me was interesting, because without that part, like, what's the purpose of the whole thing? And then I just started focusing more on what happens after people get to the site. And then I ran into, I think it was the first split testing tool in the world publicly available through Google. I can't even remember what it was called.
Wasn't it Website Optimizer or something like that?
It was, I can't even remember. But essentially what it did was just make it so that you could run, two simultaneous versions and get the stats, get the numbers. And that was fascinating to me, because then it just clicked with me, because I thought it was, there's so many, there still are at that point in time, especially there was a lot of books claiming a lot of things around how to do, marketing and sales and everything. And there was very little kind of empirical data. And so to me, it was just fascinating being able to actually test things and learn and become wiser. And when it comes to human behavior and decision-making, motivation psychology is just extremely complex. So that became my approach. And then I focused more and more on general kind of CRO conversion optimization, not my angle in the beginning was strictly copy, and then it became more broad, and I started, learning more about usability and so on, and then made a lot of mistakes and didn't have a scientific background. So, for example, one of the things I had to learn was more about statistics and stuff, because that's, of course, very important as far as being able to understand the data and know when you have an actual result and when you don't, which is one of the things that can make this more difficult.
Yeah, one of the things I would love to achieve today is to kind of have a kind of a framework kind of understanding of how you really do CRO well. And I could already hear that you said you started by driving traffic to a web page and then starting to think about what happens to that traffic.
Yeah.
Like if we want to make people money.
Yeah, exactly.
Funnel it onwards. But what does the full cycle there look like? If you can say a few more words on it.
If we go back to like the overall process revolving around research and experimentation and validation. So those 3 steps are essentially the process, you could say. I mean, I personally believe that the research part is really, really important. Because, almost every case you work with is going to be different. It's hard to have, like best practices that apply broadly. I think within a category like e-commerce, you're approaching something where there is more best practices because we've learned things about what a good cart, how that performs and what it looks like in a checkout and so on. But as soon as we're dealing with lead gen or with software or SaaS or all these other things, it's much more difficult. And you don't have a bunch of small levers in e-commerce, for example. Oh, we can add a cross-sell in the cart and we can, see AOV go up. Whoa, success. That doesn't in the same way exist, for example, with software and so on. So it's a much more difficult task. And it's not about just tweaking small elements. It's about fundamentally understanding, the market and understanding the users, understanding their motivations, understanding how does, for example, the software fit in here, and how do we actually, understand the problems they're trying to solve and the language they use. And, right. So it's already becoming, so many different layers. So to me, that's the whole research part, is really understanding what the world looks like through the perspective of the users.
Yeah, it already got me thinking about certain types of content. You can ask for a certain type of conversion, like it's very what you classically would call top funnel, people just doing some very broad research. We can't go and say, book a demo or buy our product.
Exactly.
Moving into that as well.
Exactly. And that's, one of the things I talk a lot about is awareness levels, for example, and that we're going back to the 60s there, like Eugene Schwartz, but it's one of the things that a lot of people get wrong these days. For example, if we're looking at ads and landing pages, there's often a mismatch between the awareness level of the audience and then the content there. And you just mentioned the typical thing and so to me, understanding all this stuff is just absolutely fundamental. And sometimes it comes down to just, talking to the people in sales, or the people or not just, but one of the very valuable things you could do is talk to the people who sit there all day and actually talk to the customers. And I feel like sometimes there's just like silos, and it's very fragmented. There we go. Thank you. My Danish is playing in here. And so there's a lot of information and knowledge that kind of falls through the cracks. And so, for example, one of the first things I do for the research part of the process when I get hired by a client is I go directly to sales and customer success and talk to them to try to understand, like, what are the common problems people are trying to solve, and what are common questions you get, all this stuff. Sometimes I feel slightly bad about it because I'm going to internal resources and mining all this insight. And then you present it to, for example, marketing. They're like, oh, wow, incredible insights. I'm like, yeah, but they were already here. So that's an example. And then, of course, we have, a whole bunch of quantitative research as far as, looking at analytics and so on, and everything from understanding what devices are they visiting, the website on, what are the most important experiences, desktop and mobile, two very, very different things. So let's understand this and how much traffic is there, and let's build some funnels and see where people are dropping out. And then that gives an indication of where to start working. And so once we've gone through the whole research part, well, then we can start building some hypotheses. We can start prioritizing different issues. We can start creating hypotheses, and based on those hypotheses, we can start creating treatments that we then want to experiment with. And the experimentation part is also quite important. And if you have enough traffic, then running an A/B test is preferable, because you're eliminating quite a bit of noise in the sense that it's the same quality of traffic, it's the same time period. But if you don't have enough traffic to run an A/B test, then it's not going to be helpful. It's going to be worse. So then you're stuck with comparing periods and so on. But the thing that's important, I think, is just to have the experimentation mindset. So we're saying, okay, we conducted research. We believe we have enough evidence to think that this new version is better. but we're going to run it as an experiment. So we're going to test it. We're going to figure out, is it actually better? And then that involves the validation overall. So also there's
so many questions already, Michael.
Sure. Yeah, well, that was also a long-winded version of it. But the idea being, validation overall. So we're trying to do validation at every step. So like, okay, we think there's a problem on this page. And then my first question would be, why do you think so? And if you can't answer that, I say, well, then maybe, let's validate that. Is that a problem? So we can do that through some research, for example. And then we can validate our hypotheses, for example, by, building a prototype and then maybe do some user testing on that. And so on and so on. So we're always trying to follow a pseudo-scientific process, right? In the sense that we observe something, we have some questions around it, and then we hypothesize, and then afterwards we're trying to pick that hypothesis apart, where exposing it to rigorous testing, right? So we can try to be as sure as possible that the thing we've created will actually give us the results we think, we hope.
Looking for like a simple rule of thumb, when do kind of a web page have enough traffic for A/B testing?
It depends kind of on the baseline conversion rate. If we want to get into details, the higher the baseline conversion rate, the smaller a sample essentially you'll need to be able to
so if it's 1% today and then you test
so 1%, that's well, in some ways that can be a fine conversion rate, but it's low from a statistical standpoint. So you'll need a lot of volume, a lot of sample, and that's kind of the crux of the problem, is that you need a decent sample size in order to be able to detect a difference between the two. And the smaller the sample is, the more noise there is, really. So you have to be more and more careful that you can actually detect that. If you have a higher baseline conversion rate, you need less of a sample. So the whole thing comes down to sample. And I would typically say if you have 1,000 conversions a month, whatever that is, and so that could be, depending on what you're testing, preferably you would have at least 1,000 of your most meaningful conversion, which could be, maybe that's a demo, maybe that's sign up, maybe that's an actual sale, and so on.
I think that it's interesting that you say that, because I think that rules out a lot of a lot of software companies.
It does, and that's the thing. So, but that doesn't mean you can't do optimization or experimentation. You just means there's one tool, A/B testing, that's not really going to be an option for you. You should not do that. I mean, there's other things you can do, of course. You could run a site-wide test and then use, some proxy metrics. Then you just have to be aware that it's a proxy metric and it's, not the main one. You have to be careful with it. But for example, if you run a site-wide test on your, I don't know, like a lot of software SaaS companies, they'll have like book a demo button or something at the top, and you'll have that across the whole site. So testing things like that accumulates traffic because it's running across the entire website, and it's an important metric to look at. Then your primary metric there could be, how many people actually click the thing, and then you can use a guardrail metric, which is how many people actually fill out the form then and book the demo, knowing that one will be smaller. Then you use that as a guardrail metric. So there's different ways of applying it. But the main thing I kind of want to challenge is there can be a misunderstanding that everyone should A/B test everything. That's very, very wrong. You have to have some premises, to build that on. If you don't have those, then it doesn't make sense, because you'll just be making bad decisions based on very small samples.
And if we talk about the A/B test, how much, you probably have had this question many times, how much can you test at one time, like between A and B? Can you change an image?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's a question of impact versus precision, you could say. So if you want to be very, very, very precise, knowing exactly what made the change, then of course you're then locked into changing one element at a time. But you don't have to think very long about it before you realize that might not be the most efficient way of optimizing something. If we have to run it, and let's say it takes a month to conclude an experiment.
It's too slow.
It's going to be very, very, very slow. So in many cases, I'll go for impact and start with that. And sometimes I compare it. I have a stupid comparison where if your car won't drive and there's no roof on there's no wheels, there's no gas, there's no doors, and there's no wheel. Let's change the most essential things. Let's get some wheels on the thing. Let's get some gas in there. Let's make sure that you actually have a steering wheel. And it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, let's start by putting the steering wheel in.
Yeah, and see
if it drives. Oh, it's not driving.
Huh.
Right? Or you put the wheels and everything on, and then someone goes, no, that doesn't work because we don't know if it was the gasoline or the wheels. I say, right now, that doesn't matter, right? We have done very thorough research. We know that our landing page has some big errors. There's some things that are really, really not good here. And we have 5 huge things. Then I'd be like, let's change all of them and run a radical experiment and hopefully see a significant lift. And then afterwards, we can start picking it apart, right? And then if it's really important for us to know whether it was this or that, then we can start doing that. The other thing is sometimes a change in and of itself might not be enough that it's meaningful in the way that you can actually run an experiment and see a significant lift. And sometimes it's a combination of combining a couple of different things. But that's also why it's so important with thorough research. And I would say a lot of times if you're just guessing, well, then people become more fixated on, we have to know if it was this or that because we're guessing. You see what I mean? And so to me, for example, A/B testing is not really research, it's validation. Like we do all the thorough work as if we're never going to be able to A/B test, and then that's the final validation step. So rather than just saying, oh, we have A/B testing, so now we can just we can just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. That to me is not very effective. And I think that's what a lot of people end up with. And that's also why there's a lot of kind of stop-start with conversion optimization, if that is the approach, because very quickly it kind of just falls apart because it's like, yeah, we tested this, we tested that, nothing works. But it's because you don't have a plan, you don't have a strategy.
There's a lot of topics that I want to go for. Maybe I want to ask kind of, so if A/B tests are out of the picture, what are the other tools in the toolbox that you can go look at?
The whole research part is going to be the same. Yeah. So, I mean, for qualitative stuff, I'd be doing interviews with the people who are in contact with, I always say, talk to the people who talk to the people who pay you money, essentially. So the frontline crew who really know the audience well. And one of the things that's really cool about that is, of course, I still want to talk to the users, the potential customers themselves, the target audience. But the really interesting thing is if you have someone who's been sitting in sales for 5 years, like they have accumulated knowledge from hundreds of sales sessions. So they can, in a way, in some senses, they can give you better insights than you can from interviewing the target audience. It might be different questions you ask them, but yeah. And then perhaps it could be surveys, it could be interviews, user testing, and so on. Then I would probably get some heat maps up and running. I would probably get some session recordings up and running, so you can start seeing how users actually navigate the site and so on. And the difference, the interesting thing about session recordings is that it's a real situation. It's not, user testing is very valuable, but it's the one Achilles heel there is it's a fake situation. And when you're watching session recorders, you can't hear what they're not thinking aloud, but it's their actual behavior, which can be quite sobering to watch. An example I don't have a blog anymore, but when I had back in the day, I had this idea that every person came in with lots of time and they go and they see my blog post and they read it, title and the whole thing. And then I started watching session recordings and it was shocking to me. It's like people fly in, they go up, they scroll down, they scroll up, they go to a different blog post, they go over here, they go over there, complete chaos. And that to me was just interesting because there's like the real world experience of what they're doing, and then there was like my perception, which was completely different.
Yeah, that's actually something it's less in simple terms. Also, when we release blog posts that I really focused on, it's like sometimes even more beyond the content. It's just, is it very readable if somebody sits on a phone so they can quickly scan through it? But already now, Michael, we've laid out months of work, so maybe it's good to do let's do an intermediate ad for why people should spend time on this. So I thought about maybe you can kind of fly through a couple of your highlights or the most impactful things you've done with the conversion rate optimization to kind of keep people's motivation there to do all these tests and all these research things.
So you're thinking like cases, examples?
Yeah, like stuff you have kind of impacted and achieved with the conversion rate optimization. Cool. I'd be super curious to hear.
One of the things that kind of stands out to me as a good example, especially of like a research-driven approach, is when I was working for Unbounce, SaaS company, essentially a landing page builder.
Does it still exist? I haven't.
Yeah. Yep.
Unbounce.com, right?
Yeah. And so we did a bunch of optimization for them. One of the things we looked at was, or overall, I made some big improvements on the sign up process. So very typical, you choose a plan, then you get like a 30-day free trial, and then you give your credit card information up front, so it can, just transition, and then you have the, you can cancel anytime within the 30 days. And then on the first step after clicking the button, you get some of the first form fields, right? And then we had, this was very much desktop. This was some years ago. And also Unbounce is a desktop tool. So it's one of those instances where everything happens on desktop, not really mobile.
Yeah.
Anyways, so we had more space. That's why I'm saying it. But so there was the form field, and then we had some bullet points on the right hand side of the screen that was supposed to motivate people to fly through. And we made some big improvements. And so I was looking at those bullet points, which I just came up with from my marketer's logic. So it's stuff like 97% satisfaction rating or something like that, and start building landing pages now. No need to wait, and something about great customer success or something. And then I went down to the folks in customer success, and I showed them, and I said, does this sound like anything our customers are concerned about, or that they would ask? And say, nope, not at all. I said, oh, interesting. Okay. So what are typical questions they ask? What are concerns they have? And now I probably can't remember exactly, but it was stuff like, will I be billed within the 30 days? Can I change plans within the 30 days? And I can't remember. Maybe it was something like, why are you asking for my credit card information? So I said, oh, interesting. And then I said, so what are your answers to those questions? And then literally word for word, I put that in. So it became kind of an FAQ with those, critical questions, and then answer them in a friendly way. Yeah. And with that one, we saw, I believe it was a 10% increase. And, that deep in the funnel, that's quite, meaningful.
Yeah, that means money.
Impact, yeah. But I like that, to use that example, because I think it illustrates a couple of different things. It illustrates that the marketer's logic, sometimes the thing you just throw in there, which sounds good to you, is not something that it even registers with your target audience. And then again, by going, in this case, doing, very easy piece of research, going to talk to the people who actually know what the customers think, hearing their insights, and then implementing it, and then again running it as an experiment, saying, aha, my hypothesis now is that what we got there already doesn't matter, and that this is more meaningful. So let's experiment with it and see if it actually has the impact that we hope it does. So I think that one is great. And then, another thing that stands out to me is just like the vast amount of tests I've run that had no impact, which is a reality. I think, a lot of times when we talk about A/B testing, people want to present all these incredible cases, but, I think a normal win rate is about 10%, for tests. So that, means you're probably going to run 9 tests that aren't successful for the one that is. Of course, that's kind of just, a very broad generalization, but it illustrates the problem there. So it's just, I've tried that so many times that, even with good research and so on, what you put together just doesn't have an impact. But that's or it underperforms, and it hurt conversions by 10%. And again, that's almost more important, catching stuff like that, so you don't implement things that actually hurt your business. Yeah. So and that comes back to the validation step. There was one particular client I was working for where they had what I thought was one of the worst demo sign up pages I've ever seen. I was like, ha! Like, laughing my ass off. This is going to be so easy. And I went through 10 different iterations or something. I just could not freaking, beat the stupid original version that they had, which of course is humbling for me, because I come through the door thinking I'm the man. And then,
How do you make sure that you actually learn something from all the tests and research that you do? Because one thing is you see, oh, it was better. But how do you understand the why behind all these tests and research you do?
It comes down to, I think the first thing is really understanding the problem you're trying to solve. So having a clear idea of what is the problem? Is there an actual problem here? Yes, we're seeing an 80% drop off on step 2 of the sign up process or something, which is critical. It's so far down the funnel, and also it doesn't make sense because people have already committed. Okay, so we can validate with some data that people are dropping out that looks to be a problem. Okay, good. Let's try to understand what is causing the problem. So then we can start looking at session recordings. We can look at analytics and yada, yada. And then we can hypothesize about it. It's like, okay, so There's something in there that clearly people are reacting to that they don't understand. They don't understand why we are, why we want their credit card information up front.
Yeah.
Okay, this sounds, we've got evidence now that this is an actual problem. We've interviewed customers, they hate it. Okay, we have a pretty good idea this is the thing. Let's come up with a hypothesis for how to make it better. Okay, well, we'll make it better by actually explaining why we need their credit card information up front. Then we implement that, and run it as an experiment, either as an A/B test or we're comparing periods. And then we say, hey, it actually performed 10% better than before. So in that case, we have a very clear idea that we actually had identified a real problem and we had a solution. And then from there, we can, have an overall learning in this case that, this is a very sensitive area. People are surprised we're asking for credit card information. And by, explaining it to them, holding their hand a little bit, we can help them through. And when you don't learn from your testing is when you have completely random ideas where it's like, I think it should be orange.
Yeah.
It's, just like kind of random stuff where it's like, wouldn't it be fascinating if we, change this to that? And in many cases, the quick test there is to say why, and if the person proposing the change can't really formulate why, then you're probably not going to learn from it, and it's probably not a worthwhile test. So if you can't come up with a short hypothesis and you can't tell me what metric you're going to move by doing this, well then, back to the drawing board.
Yeah. If some of the people listening to this have never done conversion rate optimization before, where should they focus their attention then? Like if you're kind of a hired gun, improve our conversion rate in, let's say, let's for the context, say you're in a B2B company, like how would you kind of diagnose where to kind of put your attention and try to improve stuff?
So if you're in-house, for example, I think one of the problems can be that, I think we all experience this, that when you work with the same thing for a long time, you become less objective.
Yes.
Right. That's difficult. And so sometimes that's where I have a bit of a strength coming in as a consultant from the outside, because I'm not quite as deep into it. Right. So typically what I start with is, before I really go heavy into research, I want to familiarize myself with, for example, the website. Right. And so first off, I'm trying to not be an expert or anything like that, just trying to be a human being, going through the sales experience, the conversion experience. That's the first step. And then from there, I kind of get an idea about, I was really confused here, I was really confused there, this doesn't make sense to me, and so on. Or there was, bugs, this button didn't work, and so on. So we're starting very broad, and then that kind of just, helps me hone in on some things that could potentially be problems. And then you can dig in from there. You start looking at your analytics. I think there's a problem on this step of this page. Is there? And so on. And then you add on more and more research. But if you are, for example, just curious about doing this yourself in your in-house, and you're, for example, in the marketing team, or you're someone who touches content, I would say the easiest thing is to, start by talking to the salespeople. And start by talking to the people in customer success.
And what should you talk with them about?
Yes, the weather.
Yeah.
No, I would start somewhere. I would start by asking, for example, what are the 3 most common questions you get? And that's usually a very interesting starting point. And that often indicates, that there's a lack of that information in the marketing process or the buyer journey. Because if they're actually asking these questions on a demo call or calling CS, well, it means that these questions haven't been answered. So that gives us some indications of what we need to present, in the user journey to make them convert. I would maybe ask stuff like, if you could change anything on the site today, what would it be? Because often, for example, in sales, they're like, I would change, it's so ridiculous on the homepage, it says this and that, which is just not true. And we always have this problem on calls. You often discover stuff like that. And then I would be asking for, going back to what are the most common questions, then I would say, so how do you answer those questions? And then I really listen carefully, because then, that's inspiration for copy and for content and so on. I would ask sales, for example, what's the big aha moment? Are there any big aha moments where people either say yes or no? Right? Is there something where you go, you present this aspect of the software and people go, it's not for us. Yeah, either that, or they're like, no, this is not for me, because that's really important to know also. I would ask, are there any sales arguments, for example, that are really powerful? And then that goes back to, so you, in a way, you can kind of get a bit of a cheat sheet, you could say, and then you can use that to actually analyze the website with. And in a lot of cases, what the marketing team has been writing is often quite far from what the for example, sales team would probably do. I'm generalizing. Sometimes it's very well aligned. I just run into this a lot. So to me, that's a simple and very, very interesting place to start.
What about more like science-based things like psychology or behavioral stuff, or like nudging people? Is that something you draw upon as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's some basic psychological elements that are important. I mean, there's something, I guess, as basic as just like cognitive load. How complicated is, for example, the page I'm looking at, or the process, like how much mental energy do I have to exert to try and figure this stuff out? I mean, that's one of the things that often goes wrong. So just being aware of that, I think, is really interesting. Then there's basic stuff like, fast and slow thinking, going back to Kahneman, system 1 and 2 stuff, where, system 1 is autopilot, is very, very intuitive and just kind of takes whatever it's there and kind of creates its own story. And then you have the analytical engine, system 2, which is hard to engage. And then you kind of have to be aware that often when we're, if we're putting together a website, we're sitting there very much in system 2, being very analytical about everything. But the experience for most people is through system 1, right? So often there's a mismatch there. And
that book is still unread on my shelf.
Oh, it's a fantastic book. Some of the things, there's some of his studies that have kind of been picked apart and stuff, and there's some of the things he goes through that has been debunked, but fundamental principles of what he establishes is certainly legit. Then there's, things like framing, I think is of course very important to think about. The way you say something, the way you present something has direct impact on how it will be perceived. Comes also down to knowing your audience. A simple thing is like, does the button say submit, or does it say send me a free offer now, for example? How are you framing it? Are you framing it as something they have to part with, something they have to do, or something positive they're going to get?
Have you ever run into, so there's some contrarians at our office saying that we cannot make the conversion too smooth as well, because then you just get everybody through the door?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, you can.
Friction is okay to test their intent.
Oh, certainly. I mean, friction is another, really interesting area, and we have a tendency to just want to remove all friction.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, you also want to have a certain quality of leads, so you don't want to waste time on leads that aren't a match. So you want to introduce good friction in that sense. It could be something like, do you have a budget of over $20,000 or something? Yes or no? No, sorry, this is not for you, and so on. Definitely. But one psychological aspect that I'm fascinated by, that I think is really important, is actually the keynote I'm doing these days is about that, is disappointment, and how disappointment affects us, which I think is really important.
I think you need to say a bit more.
Yeah. But so managing expectations. So one of the things that that happens when we get disappointed is there's a great deal of emotional pain involved with disappointment. It's deep in our not just psychology but physiology, that we react very strongly and negatively to disappointment. And essentially what disappointment is from a psychological standpoint is when our expectation of reality does not live up to our experience of reality. And we're constantly forming ideas, hypotheses about future outcomes and what we think is going to happen. And when that doesn't come into fruition, it feels very, very bad. There's also a neurochemical process that happens that I won't get into now. Yeah. The main thing just being that I think often we think of obstacles or friction on a website as a minor annoyance, when it's actually disappointment. And a minor annoyance is just something that's there real quick and disappears. But disappointment lingers, and you remember it, and it damages your source credibility, damages your relationships with your users. And so that's one of the reasons why I think a lot about expectation management. And one of the typical things is we have a tendency, of course, as salespeople, to oversell and underdeliver because we want to close the deal. But that's very short-term thinking. And you could break that down essentially to every step of the buyer journey. Like, what are you saying in your ads? What expectations are you building up? And are you able to continuously deliver on those expectations, or are you not?
That's very interesting.
I think it's extremely interesting because even with, for example, running A/B tests and stuff, you might be testing something that essentially is a dark pattern. You don't mean it to be a dark pattern. So you do something finicky where you change, we're not going to, if we say it like this, we get more people to sign up for a trial, where then they automatically go to, an annual plan, right? Yeah. Oh, we're seeing more annual plans. Great. And then it turns out actually that you did it in such a way that users didn't understand that. They thought it was a monthly and you can cancel anytime. So then after the 7-day trial, they're like, oh, okay, so I got hoodwinked here. I got tricked into paying a year up front for this thing I didn't want. And then you have a lot of angry customers, for example. So in the test, it gave you a good result, but in reality, it's something that's going to really affect lifetime value, and it's going to, make people not trust you, and it's going to give you bad publicity and bad reviews and stuff like that. So thinking of some longer term, big picture stuff like that, I think is really important.
And so it's kind of monitoring the path of disappointment through your funnel. Where are you like hurting the expectations that are set to you?
Exactly. And so you can put it differently. If you're on the individual level are having problems, your life sucks because you keep getting disappointed, and you talk to a psychologist, one of the things they'll probably say is you need to learn to manage your expectations, because clearly you keep having too high expectations, right? But when we are creating experiences for other people, I would argue it's not really their job to manage their own expectations. It's our job to manage their expectations, right? By actually thinking about how we're presenting all these different things, and by resisting the urge to oversell and underdeliver, and actually to be transparent and truthful about what we're doing.
Okay, 2 more questions that I want to ask. One, I've seen you in the past talk a lot about if you are only to ask one question on our page, kind of what should that question be that you ask people to get more knowledge out of it. And afterward, I want to talk a little bit about how do you validate messaging once you come up with new messaging. But if we start with that, kind of because you think all these pages kind of is somewhat of a gold mine for you to kind of extract knowledge out of the users that are on these pages. I can't recall what question it was that you typically recommended or saw working.
It depends a little bit on, so overall, rather than doing like a huge survey with a lot of questions that takes a lot of time for people, and not many people want to do it, it's really intrusive, then you can use a little feedback poll. There's little things that pops up, and it asks one question. It's not very intrusive. People can very quickly, you can give them multiple choice, open-ended, whatever, but people can very quickly give you a reply and then go about their day. So I want to bother people as little as possible, and then depending on the context, often it makes more sense to get a larger volume, very precise answers to one question, right? And then it depends, I think, on where you are in the journey, in the funnel, what questions you'll want to ask. So it could be, for example, what could be a pricing page or something. You could ask something like, is there anything that's unclear to you? Are there any unanswered questions you have? Something like that could be quite insightful. Another one that can be really interesting is like the post confirmation question. Is there anything that almost stopped you from buying or signing up, whatever it is today? That one it sounds very basic, but it can be quite interesting, the insights you get, because essentially the way to think about it is very few frustrated customers or users of the site, visitors, even when they're annoyed or frustrated, are going to take the time to tell you. Like, they're just going to leave and be frustrated. So the next best thing is the ones who actually stuck it out, will ask them, hey, did you encounter something that almost made you, stop today? That one can be really, really, really interesting. And then you could also argue that in that case, you're not bothering them while they're, going through the site, you're asking them afterwards.
Cool. I think after hearing you talk about it, we implemented that kind of.
Oh, interesting.
Like, is there any information that you're missing, or do you have an extra question to our pricing? And you don't get a 10% reply rate, but you get like 1-2% replies. So then it's always good conversation that you want to be having with these customers that do come out of it.
Oh yeah. And this is qualitative. So we're not looking at putting any stats or significance to it. No. These are clues, these are insights. And sometimes it's all over the place, and you're like, there's no patterns. This is completely random. We can't answer all these questions. And sometimes it's just something very, 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 very clear.
And then the other question that I mentioned before is that, like, one of the things that I think a lot about is how to validate messaging, because when you have a feature, you can call it 10 different things, and they can have 20 different value propositions depending on who you're explaining it to. But when you do have a website, what is a good approach to validate messaging? Because I think I don't know if it's even possible to do in a quantitative way, or you need to actually speak with people and have them like one by one reply. What do you understand when we write this on this website?
Sure. Well, I mean, I would probably have a tendency to try and, if possible, triangulate. So maybe there's different ways we can test this. Maybe we could start by testing it through some ads, for example. And then we want that to be the only variable. How we talk about this new feature, what's the value prop for it? That could be one way. And then maybe it's like, well, we also have this email blast, right, to talk about this new thing, and then the test there is we're going to call it two different things, and or in the subject line we're going to call it two different things, and then from there we can get some idea of which one folks prefer. You could use your own target audience to say, have them vote, like which one makes most sense to you. I go back maybe to the people in customer success, talk to them about what's the language people use. There's bigger stuff, like you could start analyzing reviews, for example, to try to understand language better and so on. So there's many different ways of doing it. And then, I mean, if you have dedicated landing pages, for example, where you can isolate the test messaging, test that as the only thing. So, just with something like that, if possible, I'd be trying to look at, multiple different sources and saying, like, what are all the different channels we have for this? Right now, I'm working with a client where we are doing app store optimization.
Yeah. Okay.
And because it's an app that their business revolves around, they have much more traffic in the app store than they do on the site. So one of the things for me that's exciting is using that traffic in the app store to actually test messaging, and then we can bring that back to the site, for example.
Really good, Michael. Okay, as we're coming to the end here, I want to be sure to ask you kind of what are the lowest hanging fruit here that people should take with them from your many years of CRO experience now? Like, what are the things that are typically wins if you start doing them?
Well, I mean, there's multiple different levels. I mean, just like starting at something very basic that I see a lot, that might be less the case for B2B, depending on what it is, I guess. I mean, you can still have B2B e-commerce, but I was just going to say, for example, in e-commerce, one of the things I very often see is I'll find an ad, I'll start with the ad, and then click all the way through to the confirmation. And then there's multiple different steps along the way. And very, very often could be like a bug or something weird going on. That's a technical issue that's preventing people from converting. And stuff like that is extremely low hanging fruit. I mean, I sometimes feel bad about presenting it to clients because it's like, it literally took me 10 minutes, one person, all I had to do was just go through the full user journey. So that can be a low hanging one. Go through all your ads and make sure that, everything makes sense the whole way through. That could also be something like just, what I experience a lot is the ad addresses my very low awareness level. And I'm like, oh, they're curious. I want to learn more about this. And then you get to the landing page, and then it's like, sign up for 3 years and get 10% off. And you're like, what the hell? Just, so there's some logical stuff there that can be quite, helpful. The other thing that could be helpful is looking at the experience on different devices. It sounds ridiculously basic, but I've run into this all the time. Even with, you're building mobile first and then everything sucks on desktop, or the other way around, or like you have a responsive layout. And then you've built it on desktop, it looks great, and the order of things, then you see it on mobile, and it's like everything is just completely different, and the whole logic you build is no longer there. So where are the conversions coming? Where's the volume? And then what device?
There was some CRO guy that built like a software tool that helped you break down all the traffic by like Samsung, Apple, Android.
Yeah, it's probably Craig Sullivan. Yeah.
Yeah, what's the name of that tool? I used it and it was great because like then you saw like, oh, the complete experience is completely broken on Android phones or
well, I can't remember now. It wasn't.
I'll put it into the comments of this afterwards. It was actually great because then you had some kind of, it's working all these places, but here's a few places where it's completely broken. And
definitely. I mean, Craig has some great ways of doing that. He has some Looker reports and some stuff you can use for GA4, because I think what you're talking about,
that name sounds like the right name.
But you can also get that. Follow him on LinkedIn because he has a bunch of articles around it. But you can do that stuff yourself also in analytics. It's just going to be a little bit more complicated. Yeah, because I mean, sometimes you have just things that are broken in different, on different devices and browsers and operating systems and so on. So there is definitely some low hanging fruit there. And then I think a way to identify some low hanging fruit again is going back and doing some of the basic research I talked about, with talking to customer success and sales.
Yeah,
and so
really
on.
good. Last two things. What's your recommendations if people want to get better at CRO? Who should they follow, or what book should they read, or what podcast should they?
Yeah, it almost sounded like you said if people want to get bitter at.
Bitter.
We can talk about both. If you really want to get bitter, no. So I usually recommend CXL.
CXL, yeah, okay. Ole just wrote that the tool died, but the Looker Studio reports rocks.
Yes.
Thank you, Ole.
Well, I mean, CXL is a great platform for educating oneself within.
And that's a marketing community or something like
that. No,
it's
well, it used to be an agency, and then they tagged on the whole institute education part. So they have tons and tons of courses mainly with a focus on growth, experimentation, marketing. Overall CRO stuff, but there's so many different from a lot of really cool people in there. I also have a course.
Yes.
I can give you a discount code for that. You can share afterwards if you want. I have a landing page course there.
That's my last question, Michael. If people want to work with you or learn more about your world of CRO, what's the path that they should be taking?
Well, my site is under construction right now. So I would recommend LinkedIn. Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. Reach out to me over LinkedIn. That's probably best. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. I think it's really become an awesome platform, and it's I don't really see much need to blog or do stuff anywhere else really, because that's like where the action is. I know that they owe your content then, but I think LinkedIn is just such a great place. And to anyone who's not really involved in LinkedIn, I would say it's pretty essential, like to anything that has to do with business and career or so on.
Yeah, it's just getting better and better. It seems, even also just for running ads. But
yeah,
big fan here as well.
yeah. I was away from LinkedIn for several years, and then I came back 2 years ago. And like, wow, so much changed. So, yeah.
Cool. Michael, I want to say thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge about the topic. I know you know a million times more than just this.
Yeah, it was fun, and thank you so much for inviting me.
We hope you like listening to us. Subscribe to our podcast and the ones that we have been guests on.
And if you have any feedback for us, just do let us know. And should there be a guest that you think we should be talking to, then pitch us.
We're looking forward to seeing you.